I'm not standing on a desk. Hey folks, this one is a Patreon-sponsored review, commissioned and requested. I have now rewatched, because I have seen it before, Dead Poets Society. This is going to be a really kind of a weird one for me to talk about. And I have a distinct feeling I'm going to be talking about this one in much more academic terms than I usually do with these kinds of reviews. My feelings on it come at it from that angle to such a degree that I was tempted to actually try and script this out and do it as a full-blown video essay, but the problem was I couldn't come up with a conclusion that I was reaching towards, only that this seems to be the only way that I can process and think of this film is from a more intellectual, more academic place. And the main reason for that is I have difficulty connecting with this movie emotionally. There are a number of reasons for that, but the first thing I want to say right off the bat is that does not make this a bad film, nor does it even make it a film that fails in what it sets out to do. What it means is that what it is doing doesn't really connect to my own experience for a number of reasons and in a variety of ways. It doesn't mean that I think it's bad, it just means it's kind of not for me. To whatever degree I was able to ever connect with this film, that was at an earlier point in my life. And watching it now, I'm probably more distant from it than I've ever been in terms of being in the field where it was going to connect with me. Honestly, I probably needed to see this in high school. I didn't though. First time I saw it, I was already in my 20s, and I enjoyed it. At least I remember enjoying it. But I also remember thinking, like, it's a little pretentious. Which, I'm not going to say that's an unfair term, but is also, I think, a little harsh. Pretension is a term you use when something acts like it has something important to say, but doesn't really. And it's not that Dead Poets Society doesn't have much to say, it's that what it's saying is just kind of lost on me. So, where do we go with this? Okay, so, in case you're watching this review and don't know the movie, I think most people know, well, most people my age know this movie anyway. I don't know if younger people watch this movie at all or not. Somebody will have to tell me. But this is a boarding school film. It is set at a prestigious boarding school in the 50s, I think? Maybe. It's not contemporary from when it was made. And it stars quite a number of up-and-coming young male actors of the day, and Robin Williams as their new poetry teacher, who is instructing them to basically break molds and really challenges the way that they have otherwise been taught by this university to go about their lives and how they take in new information. Now, that structure is by no means unique to this movie. It's been around for a while, and it's been reused more than a few times since then. It's the inspiring teacher is not a new or particularly unique story. It wasn't even new at the time this was made. What this does, and I do think it's to its credit, it does really narrow in on a pretty specific type of, I'm not sure I want to say type of intended audience, but the experience that it is trying to evoke is not universal. This is not trying to be a broad-reaching, connects with everybody story. It is speaking to really specific experiences, which is not to say that you needed to have been in a boarding school 70 years ago in order to connect with it, but what it is speaking to is the experience of young, privileged white men. And I'm hoping that people will take my saying that as an acknowledgement of fact and not a condemnation. That's who it's about, and that's the experience that it's speaking towards. That's not to say that other people cannot connect to it, but it's really hammering hard on that, and I think it's part of the reason that I am not able to connect with it. Because despite growing up white male and privileged, like, not badly off. Let's go with that. I didn't want for a lot. I didn't have to worry about whether or not I was going to get a filling meal or anything like that. So I was decently, in terms of my circumstances growing up, they were fine. But like, I certainly also wasn't at a level where I was going to be sent off to a prestigious boarding school that gears people up to be able to go to Harvard. And I think part of the reason that, even though, at least at the time that I was the age of these boys in this movie, I did fit that demographic, even watching this younger didn't properly connect with me because I didn't feel confined by that. Which isn't to say that some, or many even, young people, young men especially, don't. What it's a movie about young men who have thrust upon them heavy expectations based entirely on what their parents did and want for them. Either their parents or their parents' generation. Because pretty much nobody of 30s and younger is portrayed particularly negatively, and nobody over 40, 50 definitely, is portrayed in a very good light. Like, there's one teacher who kind of straddles the border, who kind of bonds a little bit with Keating, Robin Williams' character, but we don't also see a lot of that. I'll kind of come back to that in a little bit, in a way. But it is very much geared towards how young men are confined by the structures placed on them by the generation that built what they now live in. And it is a story that only works if you come at it with a certain understanding of privilege. Because privilege, if you have it, it's kind of hard to knock. But it is confining in its own way. Now, it's a difficult thing to talk about because anytime you start to go, oh, woe is the well-off white male on a college track, oh, boo-hoo. But the simple truth is, human experience, no matter who you are, there is something that makes your existence more difficult. For you, not necessarily that experience would be difficult for anybody else. Other people are probably going to envy what you've got in most circumstances. But that doesn't mean that for you, the life that you're living is easy and wonderful. It just means that the hardships you endure are not ones of poverty or lack of opportunity or things of that nature. But there are still hardships, emotional and psychological ones, if not physical and financial ones. And that is what this is speaking to. And I think for what it is aiming to do, for the most part, it does it well. The performances are very committed. You definitely get the impression from Williams all through the younger cast. Everybody is really into what they are doing, and that helps. If you're going to do this, you need to do it with sincerity, because that is the one place where you will completely fall on your face if it doesn't feel like you mean what you're saying, if you're going to do a story like this. I do feel that there are a number of other things about it that hold me at a distance, and these are more issues for me watching it now as an adult, and less so when I would have seen it initially. So I've talked before about the issues I have with the aggrandization of, I've said before the author, but I would say writers, creators, artists in general. And I say that as someone with aspirations to be an artist of some form, who most of my creative heroes are artists. But collectively, creators, artists, writers, poets, we pat ourselves on the back a lot. And this movie does that a lot. And I say that as somebody who, art has always been incredibly meaningful to me. And as far as this channel goes, it's what I talk about. Whether you consider things like Doctor Who art or not, it is an artistic piece of work. This is what I do with my time. But there's just something about... All right, here's the thing. Art is incredibly important, and no one should ever be deprived or miss out on the opportunity to experience and have art in their lives. However, what it feels like films such as Dead Poets Society is doing, if not explicitly, certainly implicitly saying that it is art alone that gives life meaning. It is artistic expression alone that gives you fulfillment. And I just don't like the self-importance of that, if nothing else. And again, my life without art would be empty. In a lot of ways. I would be missing a lot of things that matter to me. But the way, like say for instance when the teaching, and narratively there's a reason to do this. We have a montage of all these other classes, and it's very dry, it is very academic. They're learning Latin by rote where they just have to repeat the conjugations over and over and over and over again. It is soulless. And that is done to narratively contrast the teaching method that is standard at the school with that of Keating. So it serves a narrative purpose, but the implicit message behind that, intended or not, and I'm not going to argue as to whether or not it is, but I think it's there regardless, is that only art gets to be different. Only art gets to ignite passion, which is not true. If you are an artistic person, art is what will ignite your passion. But there are people who are passionate about science, about mathematics, about coding. There is plenty of places to find passion in your life. But because art is created by artists, pretty much every piece of art, every piece of entertainment is going to lean very heavily on how much art gives you passion, because that's what gave the people who created this piece of art passion. And it becomes a little bit of a circle jerk. And this is not the most egregious example I've ever seen of that, but it does fall into that spiral a bit. And also, the tail end, I feel, goes off the rails for a couple of reasons. Before I get to kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to talking about this movie, the first is that, remember how I mentioned that Keating has this other teacher who he seems to develop some kind of friendship with, who's slightly older than him, but not as old as most of the other teachers seem to be, or at least not as stuffy? That's only implied because this movie isn't really about Keating. It isn't even really about his method of trying to teach. It is about these young boys trying to find their own voices and the ways in which Keating, yes, ignites them down that path, but it's not really about him. He's a catalyst, but it's not his story. Which makes it very strange to me that the ending decides to completely hang itself on the tragedy of Keating losing his job. But the story hasn't been about him. And I understand that it's still framed through the eyes of the boys who see this as a loss, but it really does feel like the film, in its last 20 minutes, has decided that it's going to be much more about the teacher as a person than about what he instilled in them. Or at least that's the vibe I got. People might disagree with me on that, and I may have overstated it. It doesn't completely lose the thread of where it was going, but it's a tip that I don't think serves what the movie had been up to that point. Which then does bring us to the elephant in the room, which is the character of Neil, who, upon being instructed by his father that because he participated in a play against his father's wishes, that he will be sent off to a military academy and then forced to go to medical school, and his response to that is to commit suicide. My big problem with this entire plot point is that for a film that is very heavy on its thematics, on its philosophical inclinations, I don't know what it's trying to say with this plot turn? Is it trying to be like, this is the extreme result of far too much oppression of youth by older people? Because that point had been made earlier. I don't think it helps it to hammer it home this hard. And also, if that's what it's trying to do, it's somewhat flawed as an idea for that to even be what it's saying, because honestly, this is an absurd reaction. Like, I get that the kid's upset, and I'm not even going to say I don't buy that the kid kills himself. I buy it, but when looking at it, again, maybe through adult eyes, I can't look at this and help but come away with, part of the problem here is he had poured so much of his sense of self into these artistic leanings that when they were taken away, he had nothing that he felt mattered. And again, that's not necessarily a fault of writing or a fault of characterization, because especially when you're young, you get overindulgent of your passions. Like, I think that's fair enough to say, which again is why I don't say I don't buy that he does it, because it's not a rational decision, it's an emotional decision. Duh! But at the same time, it muddies any possible message, because I can't help but feel that his very haphazardly constructed sense of self is at least partially to blame for this, and you can't lay it all on the father, the school system, whatever you want to blame, or whatever the film seems to want you to blame. Again, it's not that it's awful in and of itself, but it feels like in the entire last act of the film, it starts to lose how these events and how these turns of character feed into the lessons, the philosophy of the film. Now, there are some points in which the espoused philosophy of Carpe Diem, seize the day, does get challenged in good, credible ways. Such as by actually Keating himself. When one of his students makes a big show of things in the public hall and nearly gets expelled, Keating rightfully calls him out like, that wasn't daring, that was stupid. You know, but the problem is that in some ways it does illustrate the failings of what Keating is doing. Because he has this philosophy, and he's able to balance it because he has enough life experience to know when it's better to back off. And these boys don't. And I'm not going to agree with the other teachers who are like espousing this to young men as dangerous. Like, no, they should know this. But because they have not been raised to understand this, and instead they're having it dumped on them now in their teens when they are hormonally, emotionally, just a massive ball of very volatile energy, yeah, that's a little reckless. Because, you know, the system, the school system, this society has been capping that energy, basically shaking up a soda bottle the whole time, and Keating just like, oh, well, let's just... Well, no. You're going to want to find a way to release that a little bit more gradually, because it's been clamped down so long. And again, I just feel like it's one of those cases where there wasn't full thought put into the implications of some of the things that happened, particularly in the latter half, including some things that I'm not even necessarily going to knock it for at the time, but certainly watching now were incredibly cringy. There's the character of Knox, who falls in love with a girl who he literally saw once, and then goes to a party, and she's asleep, and her head is kind of near his lap, and he strokes her hair and kisses her forehead. And as it was building up to that, I was sitting there going, oh God, no. I mean, consent, much, she can't. She's not conscious. And the only consequence he gets for that is to get roughed up by her boyfriend because she belongs to somebody else. And then later, going to her school, humiliating her by reading this poem in front of all of her classmates, which she then goes to confront him and tries to call him out on, but he just pleads and begs until she gives him a shot. And oh my God, that made me sick to my freaking stomach. And especially when he says, look, just come with me to watch this play, and if you don't like me at the end of that, I'll leave you alone. She doesn't owe you anything. But he felt he was entitled to his one shot. He's not. That one, while it made me angry, I'm going to spend less time talking about because I think about the time in which it was made and the fact that that entire thing was framed very much as, oh, what a daring young boy taking a shot. It was typical of the time, as much as that annoys me to have to acknowledge. But it is, at the same time, framed very much through the lens of these boys. So the fact that he doesn't know her but feels he falls in love with her, and that it frames women very loosely as objects of desire when it acknowledges women at all, that's applicable to boys at that age, especially if in their day-to-day lives they don't encounter women or girls their age. So, again, that specific moment aside, it's not that it's doing a bad job at what it's trying to do, it's just that what it's trying to do doesn't speak to me. And the things that feel like maybe they should speak to me don't quite land. They're slightly off center. I think it's a pretty well-made film, and I definitely get why some people really connect with it. I do. It makes total sense to me. But it just doesn't connect with me like that. Doesn't make it a bad movie. Doesn't make it a stupid movie. Doesn't mean that you're wrong to like or love it. Just means that I don't. But that's my thoughts on Dead Poets Society. It's a noble try. It's not for me. What are your thoughts on this movie? I am really afraid I'm going to tick some people off with this. I don't know. Something in my gut tells me that. But whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Usual stuff, like, subscribe, hit the bell. I guess it helps. Share this around if you like. I have a Patreon. That was how I was commissioned to review this particular piece of work. And check all that out, or don't. End of the day, folks, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, carpe diem.